Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Jared Fishman. I'll tell you all about Jared in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it from a leadership perspective, as you will definitely discover that Jared is, you do it to bring people together for common cause. Welcome, Jared Fishman.
Thanks for having me, John.
Good. Jared Fishman is the founder and executive director of the Justice Innovation Lab, an organization that designs data-driven solutions for a more equitable, effective, and fair judicial system. Justice Innovation Labs uses a collaborative approach to help justice system decision makers identify and fix inequities in the system. Prior to founding the Justice Innovation Lab, Mr. Fishman served for 14 years as a senior civil rights prosecutor at the United States Department of Justice. He led some of the most complex civil rights prosecutions in the country, securing convictions in high-profile cases involving police misconduct, hate crimes, and human trafficking. Received many awards from the Department of Justice for his work. Welcome, Jared Fishman.
Thanks for having me on the show, John.
Great. Justice Innovation Lab. The name appeals to me because as an outsider, when I think of the justice system or the legal system, innovation is not a word that pops to my mind.
Well, it's not really a word that pops to my mind either. The reality is the justice system in America hasn't done much innovative in the last 400 years. We're still using a very similar process for addressing problems. And over the last 40 and 50 years in particular, as we've been sending problems like addiction and poverty and mental health into the criminal legal space, we haven't actually changed how we do business. And so part of what we do at Justice Innovation Lab is work with decision makers inside the justice system, prosecutors, police officers, court systems, to understand what is happening in their system that's currently leading to ineffective or unjust results, and how they can make changes to policy or structures or procedures so that they begin having better outcomes in terms of public safety and in terms of fairness in their communities.
Okay. And the layman would know that there are inefficiencies in government and the legal system. How did these inefficiencies come to you, Jared, and how did you choose to focus on it?
I was a civil rights lawyer for 14 years, and I traveled around the country to over 30 jurisdictions, looking and dealing with some of their biggest civil rights problems that they confronted. And one of the cases that I worked on was the murder of a man named Walter Scott in Charleston, South Carolina, who was killed by North Charleston police officers and whose death was one of the real turning points in the Black Lives Matter movement in 2015. And the prosecutor in Charleston, South Carolina came to me and said, listen, I want to know, are we being fair as we make choices and how we run our justice system? Are we being smart and effective about how we're approaching our work? And she'd collected data on major decision points for a really long time, but didn't have the capacity to analyze it herself. And so when she came to me with this question, can we begin to use this data to see if we're being fair? It was really an opportunity of a lifetime to then begin putting together the team, because this one prosecutor is not alone. Our justice system in reality is over 2,000 justice systems in counties and cities across America. And while that can be incredibly overwhelming when we think about the fix, it's also very exciting in terms of where there are actual opportunities for innovation. We don't need national legislation. There are things that different offices can do right now, and they just need help figuring out what those things are and beginning to build the solutions that in turn we can scale to support other communities around the country.
Great. So one of the tools or processes you use is design thinking, which, as from my perspective, came out of Silicon Valley and pioneered at Stanford. So how did you approach design thinking? How did you discover it so it could be a useful tool for your effort at the Justice Innovation Lab?
Well, clearly it's being used as a way to solve all sorts of problems in our society. And I think, why not take what's been effective in other parts of the world, instead of reinventing the wheel, take that process and bring it to the justice system? So a big part of our approach is using data to understand and quantify the problems that our system faces. We use systems thinking as a way to understand processes and procedures that are a part of and leading to and contributing to outcomes that we don't want. And then we use design thinking as a way to identify those solutions. A big part of design thinking is first understanding the problem, then beginning to contemplate what are some solutions to this problem, creating prototypes, testing them, evaluating, and then iterating, and then returning. And we think so much of our governmental problems is often dealt with at the political level. And as we've seen in recent years, the polarization in our politics have made it less and less possible to solve problems. But when you're dealing with the justice system, most of those decisions are made at the county and city level. And there, people still do work together to try to solve problems. And so if we can bring a new approach to problem solving that brings together people who don't necessarily interact or think about these things in this way, then we can begin to solve the problems. Listen, people across the justice system know it's broken. You ask the police, they'll tell you it's broken. You ask prosecutors, they'll tell you it's broken. You ask defense attorneys, they'll tell you it's broken. Same for community groups, for the health folks. And so there really is no dispute that our system is broken. The question is, how do we go about in fixing it?
And that's where the Justice Innovation Lab comes in. So how do you, how does your process work? Are you contacted by a jurisdiction, or are you invited in or imposed in? How does it work, Jared?
So far, we've always been invited in. For us, we want to work in, I always talk about how we choose our projects is three-tiered: people, place, and problem. For me, I want to know who the people are first. Who is the leader that wants to make decisions differently? Because at the end of the day, doing the data analytics only matters if it's going to cause us to make different decisions. And so we incorporate the leaders into setting the metrics, the understanding what are different things that we can and cannot say with our existing data. And if there are things that we would like to say but can't currently say it, how do we begin collecting that so that we can better understand our decision making? The second being place. Where are we doing it? What are the local resources available? What are their current data sources? Do they have allies that are working to solve something? And then finally, what is that problem? Because America's justice systems are 2,000 spread out across America. Uh, we know that solving these problems are both very local, but yet the problems that we see in each of these jurisdictions exist across the country. And so we try to use each city that wants to tackle a problem as a lab for a new idea. We pilot a project, we test and analyze that project, and the things that work, we help scale by getting that information to other decision makers across the country.
And I guess how do people find you? Do you speak at conferences, or does your work multiply? You work in one jurisdiction and they know other people, or how does the word get out, Jared? So,
Yeah, and initially it was a personal contact, someone who knew me and wanted to solve this problem. And then as we began seeing results in Charleston and other jurisdictions heard about the work that we were doing, they said, "Oh, we want that too." And so we've been connected from other players in the field. We've recently people are finding us. So we're in this status where we look for people who we think are doing innovative things in order to help build the evidence base. So for example, in St. Paul, Minnesota, they were engaging in a very, I think, innovative policy connected with traffic stops. Traffic stops have been a primary way that police have been trying to improve public safety in America for the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years. But the reality as a tactic, it's been very ineffective. It's often been implemented in quite discriminatory, with quite discriminatory impact. And it's actually a very ineffective way for the police to fight public safety. And so a cooperation in St. Paul between the police department and the prosecutor's office said, hey, let's move away from this non-public safety traffic stop. And for people who aren't familiar with that, that's pulling people over for things like a broken taillight or for a dangly in the rearview mirror. It was why Walter Scott was stopped by the police in Charleston, South Carolina for a broken taillight. It's why Philando Castile was stopped in Minnesota. And it so often is this tension point that has led to a number of deaths across America. And so the prosecutor said, no, we should probably stop doing this. We don't think it's effective, and we think it is having very discriminatory effects. The police agreed. They set up a pilot. We analyzed it. And guess what? You can stop doing these discriminatory, ineffective things without negatively impacting public safety. So we're always looking for the innovative leaders who are doing innovative things in the process, who are trying to think about these problems differently and then providing the support. The reality is there is no money at the county and city level. They don't have the funding to build these kind of innovations. And yet these are the people who are making the decisions that account for 98% of all cases in America. So if you care about the justice system, they're the people that you have to help by developing new tools to solve their problems.
Right. So a lack of resources, if someone wants to engage with your service, where is the money coming from? Is it from grants? Is it from the jurisdiction itself? Or how does that work, Jared?
So initially, we got most of our funding through national philanthropic sources, big foundations that were supporting work for the justice system. This might not be surprising, but after the 2020 protests around the murder of George Floyd, there were lots of commitment to improving criminal justice and racial inequities in America. The reality is that has changed. The fervor and excitement of building a more racially equitable and fair world has subsided, particularly as fears about public safety changed. So where we really need to move these forwards are communities who are willing to invest in themselves. And so for our latest iterations, a lot of the funding for our projects are coming from the communities themselves, sometimes in the form of county funding. A lot of times they will apply for federal funding that they can get through the Department of Justice, for example. And a lot of times they'll build a consortium of nonprofit groups in their area, such as a city foundation or community foundation, to begin spearheading the funding effort. Because the reality is solving these kind of problems is too expensive for jurisdictions to build internally. And so they need to outsource that. And being able to have a partnership between national level funders who really care about building a better justice system and local funders who really care about building a better justice system in their own communities seem to be a more sustainable partnership as we move forward.
Okay. Now, bringing it into the world of many of the people who are watching and listening, they come from the field of human development. So a cutting issue for all of them is organizational change and culture. So what are the, and you work in, you told me there's 2,000 different jurisdictions in this country and a multiplicity of stakeholders, from police to prosecutors, defenders, whatever it is. So what are it sounds like a mess when it would come to organizational culture. So what is your take on addressing that, Jared?
So we do a lot of work with the jurisdictions that we work with on how do you build a culture of innovation. And for us, we run workshops with the entire office. We actually have a big one coming up in Memphis at the end of November where we'll train the entire office. And part of what we're training them on are the principles that we've been talking about today. To understand how foreign it is to talk about data inside the justice space, like no one is doing it. They don't have the capacity. To talk about systems thinking, no one is talking about it or thinking about it. To talk about design thinking, no one is doing those things. And so a big part of what we do is introduce these concepts, number one, identify problems in their jurisdiction based on their own data, begin helping them map out their own system, because any solution that we develop has to work for them. I have all sorts of ideas about reform, but the reality is it has to work in each local jurisdiction. So how do you identify those resources, those partners, those allies, so that you can begin actually building these things? Because the hardest part of all of this is the human cooperation. It is difficult to get people to
If it
communicate.
worked for people, things would work.
No, but it's at a very basic level. Like the communication gaps between actors in the system are remarkable. And any bottleneck that exists in our justice system leads to injustice. Like I've never heard of a bottleneck that exists inside the justice system where it works out better for anyone because there was a bottleneck. No, it means that victims don't get access to services. It means defendants may be unnecessarily detained. It means evidence is lost that could be lost. And so all of these things have real implications for public safety, and it has real implications for the lives of the people who are impacted by cases that enter the justice system.
Right. So, so given the fact that you're going into, as most of the jurisdictions, if not all that you work with, invite you in and you do training and all of that, education and research and stuff. So what is the greatest obstacle to change? Is it not my problem, it's your problem? Or how do you get people to put aside their differences, Jared? So.
Well, I think a big part of the problem is people don't recognize how they contribute to the problem. Right? These are systemic issues, and there's a saying inside the world of systems thinking: a system is not the sum of its parts, but it's the product of its interactions. If you want to change a system, you have to change the interactions between its component parts. And that means changing the interaction between police and prosecutors, between prosecutors and defense attorneys, between prosecutors and defense attorneys in courts, between mental health providers in the system. And so the reality is there is actually a lot of consensus on the problem. The hardest part is bringing people together to discuss it. One of the things I like about systems thinking and about design thinking is, number one, it puts humans at the center. It recognizes that all of the people who are interacting with this system are people, that they have feelings, that they have different thoughts, and they have different obstacles into how they can exercise their discretion and their power to make better decisions. So a big part is recognizing how each of our own roles contribute to the problem and how the interactions between those component parts contribute to the problem, and focusing on those, because those are almost always going to give us most bang for our buck in trying to move things forward. And once you have successfully moved something forward once, people say, oh, well, what about this other problem? Let's use design thinking and systems thinking as a way to solve that problem too, because we could easily do that.
I'm glad you said that, because one of the elements of system, of organizational change, of course, but endemic to systems thinking and or design thinking, is measuring results. So you just gave an anecdotal response. Oh, we solved that, we can do the next. So do you have metrics that you measure for, and are those metrics accepted? So.
Yes, we have all sorts of metrics, and it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So one thing that we always look at is what we call time to disposition. How long does it take a case to move through the system? And looking at for lots of different things. How long does it take for a case to move through the system that gets dismissed? How long does it take for a case to move through the system for a case that involves a victim? How long does it take a case to move through the system for something where a piece of evidence needs to be tested? Because all of those things are slowing down our system and slowing down our outcome. So we almost always look at efficiency metrics. But then we always look at fairness metrics as well, looking at things like, are we treating men and women differently? Are we treating people differently based on their race or their national origin or their ethnicity in some sort? And particularly where it relates to some of the most important decisions, such as who are we incarcerating and for how long? Like, those are the ones that we need to make sure we are doing fairly, and that we are not using that punishment for people who don't need to be there. Because one of the things that I think most people who aren't deeply familiar with our current justice system don't realize is just what is in our system. So one of the first things that we almost always do in a jurisdiction is show them what are the types of cases that are coming into your system. Believe it or not, most places couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you what percentage of their cases are low-level drug cases, what percentage of cases are low-level theft cases. I think all of us who grew up watching Law and Order think like every case in the justice system is a murder or a rape. Like, that's not what is in our system. And in fact, the fact that our system is so bogged down with things that are not murders and attempted murders and rapes means that we actually do a lot worse job solving those things, because we're diverting our resources to things that actually don't have public safety impact on our community. And so one of the things that we help jurisdictions do is understand that, every jurisdiction I've talked to says, yeah, we care about the homicides, we don't want them. We care about non-fatal shootings. We want to make sure that those get solved. We care about rapes. And then you look at what is actually happening in their system. It's mostly things that they think are low priorities. And there are a lot of them. And those cases cumulatively create a lot of unnecessary incarceration. And so helping those people understand that is the starting point for how you fix it.
Well, that's interesting, that prioritization you talked about of murder, rape, or attempted murder, which would be the priorities. When you do the research and show the results to the jurisdiction, they're seeing, oh, we are spending 50% of our time on incidental cases. Are you able to do that, Jared?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did, and we try to do this with all jurisdiction, we have 50 categories of cases, and those 50 categories represent about 90% of what an office will see. And we have them rank them as to what they think the priority should be. And you get 5 at a time and you rank them. So you'd get murder, robbery, traffic offense, disorderly conduct, drug possession. And each person can rank them. What do they think the priority should be, 1 through 5? And then we give them another 5 and they rank them. And we give them another 5 and they rank them until we do this for an office, for a police department, for a community. And you can actually get a sense of what people think the priority should be. And then we compare it to what's in their system, or we compare it to, all right, homicides are your top thing, but in your jurisdiction, you're solving less than 50%. How is that possibly a priority if you are not solving more than half of your homicides? And I think that really requires lots of changes in how we recruit. It changes how we ingest new cases. It changes how we respond to a lot of these things. And they're exactly the kind of conversations that we have to be having in America, because for way too long, our conversations have been, well, either we do what we keep on doing because that's better for public safety, or we let everyone out. Like, those are not the two choices. Like, this is not a choice between better public safety and fairness. We have the capacity in America to do both things. And the reality is, because we haven't innovated, because we haven't thought about our process and our structures differently in 400 years, it's why we keep producing the same outcomes. And what's great is there are people who are ready to try something different.
Well, and that would, I think, lead to something as the topic of leadership, which many of our viewers focus on a daily basis, either as leaders themselves or helping others become more effective as leaders. So I'm going to throw a big question out there. From your world in the Justice Innovation Lab, what does leadership look like in a particular jurisdiction? Is there an example you can share, or how would you express that, Jared?
I mean, for me, I'm looking for leaders who are willing to tackle big problems, ask hard questions, and do things differently. That's what I think is needed. The reality is most prosecutors, most DAs in America are elected. And so there's always a political electoral thing going on where there has to be an appeal to the voters. And one of the things that we see a lot in the justice space is that the bad news story, the person who got released on bond who goes and kills someone, is devastating. And it creates a very strong loss aversion for these elected officials. So how do you overcome that loss aversion? How do you do it? Well, the answer is you got to do it with humility. You got to, number one, recognize we have a problem. And one of the things I think is great about design thinking and using data and using an incremental approach and taking what we call a hypothesis mindset is we can identify a problem. We think we might have identified a solution. We have a hypothesis that we've identified a solution, but what we know is we could be wrong. So we should evaluate and test and study so that we're not doing things that are more harmful. The reality is most of the interventions that we have done obviously reduce the harm because so much of this stuff is common sense. But there has been no evidence base. There has been no movement towards innovation in this justice space. And so now we're creating new language and new ways to talk about it in order to move people further along.
Great. Now, you're doing exciting work. You're the founder of the Justice Innovation Lab, but you're also an author. You have a book called Fire on the Levee. Tell us about that story. And I believe you're the protagonist. Am I correct, Jared?
I am a protagonist. It's a true story about a case I worked when I was a young civil rights prosecutor in the Department of Justice. In 2009, when I was about 2 years into the job, a file landed on my desk that had the least amount of information I ever had on a case. It had the autopsy that depicted the charred remains of a man who died and was found burned behind a levee in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And it had allegations that the last people known to have seen this man were the New Orleans Police Department. And so it came to me as a young civil rights investigator to try to determine whether or not the police had anything to do with the killing or burning of this man. I teamed up with a young FBI agent, a rookie herself, named Ashley Johnson, and the two of us were down in New Orleans trying to figure out whether or not there was anything to the allegations raised in some of the reporting.
Interesting. So I'm gonna guess that you had a few obstacles to overcome in this, and particularly in the wake of Katrina and the challenges in the New Orleans Police Department that are legion. Even I know about, and I know very little about the legal system. So
Yeah, it was a historically corrupt police department. The crimes that we were investigating took place in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which I think can best be described as a dystopian hellscape. And within the department, there was a lot of desire to cover this up. I mean, ultimately, we charged 5 police officers with the killing and the burning of Henry Glover and the cover-up that followed. And what I think is important to note about that cover-up was it wasn't only in at Hurricane Katrina; it continued all the way through the prosecution of the case, such that when I was interviewing people for the book, I was still learning new information some 17 years later, because there had been such a culture of cover up in New Orleans that we had to overcome.
that's fascinating. So is there a lesson from the book that you're applying in the work you do today for the Justice Innovation Lab?
Absolutely. I think, a lot of times when we think about cases, we tend to think about it through the reign of individual wrongdoing. Our whole justice system is set up to punish people for things that they did that are supposed to be morally reprehensible, that they've done with bad intent. What this case, I think, demonstrates is just how big a role systemic inequality plays, whether that's through how we police or how our process functions or what we police. Uh, these deaths that we see every year, 1,000 people die in interactions with the police department. 1,000 people. That's 1 in 20 of homicides in America are people who die at the hands of the police. And I think as a society, we should strive for that number to be zero. We should look at every in custody death as something that's wrong, whether it's justified or not. Like it's difficult to understate the impact on police officers who use force, even appropriately, in inside the line of duty. And so I think as a society, we need to begin tackling that problem. I think the story of Henry Glover, the investigation and how it played out in courts, and ultimately the impact that it had on reforms to the New Orleans Police Department both tell us a lot about what's wrong, but also how we can begin to think about things differently to fix it. And my goal in writing the story was number one, to tell a good story. I think the story is interesting. I think it continues to shock me how Henry Glover's story is not more well known in America, given just the horrendous details. The police shot a man and burned his body and covered it up, and yet it didn't spark the same kind of outrage that we've seen in other parts of America. And so I hope to use this story both as a way to tell something that is both interesting, but really should inform and persuade people on how we can better deal with some of these problems in the justice system.
Well, Jared, we could keep on going, but I know you have a busy schedule. So we're coming close to the end of our show. But as you know, I ask every guest a story about grace. Do you have a story you would like to share with us, Jared? So,
I mean, I think back very early into my career when I was studying abroad in Morocco. I was a Jewish kid who grew up in a predominantly homogenous Jewish community and had very little interactions with Arab and the Arab world. And I studied abroad in Morocco. And it was a really profound experience for me because I would travel around the country, often by myself, and was quite suspicious of interactions I had as a young Jewish kid at what would happen if people found out that I was Jewish, how would that be perceived? And on one particular day, I was wandering around Morocco and uh, had no place to stay for the night. I'd run out of food, I'd run out of water, I didn't have any place to stay, so I hitchhiked to a nearest town and asked someone, can you show me to a restaurant where I can eat? I'm out of food and water. And instead, I was brought and put under a palm tree where I was brought fresh cooked bread and olive oil and sweet mint tea. And the person said to me, "Ahlan wa sahlan," which means you're with your people, so feel at ease. And for me, it was a really remarkable experience of basic hospitality with people who I had feared would try to hurt me. In fact, really rescued me and saved me at a time of great need. And so it changed the way I think about assumptions going into relationships that I have with people. It's changed the way that I think about how we can solve problems. Like we meet people where they're at. If we can see their humanity, it's remarkable about what we can do to build something better as a community.
What a great story. And while it was a chapter early in your life, as you explained it, this moment of grace that was shown to you by this family um, has changed your worldview. So it's both transactional and transformative. So wonderful story. Jared Fishman, it has been such a pleasure. You are the director of the Justice Innovation Lab, which I believe we can find through the website that I will put on the in the notes. So, Jared, it has been such an honor to speak to you. You do good work, and my pleasure to speak to you today, sir. So.
Great. Just a plug for the book. You can get it wherever you buy your book. I think Amazon might even be running a sale right now. So if that's where you get your books, get it, and you can get it at a special price for the moment. Fire on the levy.
Well, that story needs to be told. So thank you for promoting that. I'll put that in the notes too. With that, we will go out.
Great. Thank you, John.